name is Emily. I am an ordinary girl who lives in a small town called Riverdale. Our town was always quiet and safe, where everyone knew each other. But everything changed last summer, when strange disappearances began in the city. It started when my friend Megan didn't come home after an evening run. At first, we thought that she just got lost or went to visit someone. But when she didn't show up after a day, we started to worry. The police searched for her, but found no trace of her. Lisa, a girl from our school, disappeared next. She also simply disappeared without a trace, and no one saw what happened to her. Panic began to mount, and our parents forbade us to go outside after dark. But this did not stop the disappearance. Several more girls went missing, and rumors about a maniac began to spread in the city. The police worked day and night, but could not find any leads. One evening, I was sitting at home reading a book when I heard a strange noise from the street. Looking out the window, I saw a shadow flash by the neighboring house. I felt creepy and quickly closed the curtains. The next day, I found out that another girl, my neighbor Kate, was missing. This was the last straw for me. I decided that I had to find out who was behind these disappearances and stop him. I knew it was dangerous, but the feelings of fear and anxiety were stronger. I needed to find answers to save my friends and myself. The morning after Kate's disappearance was gloomy and cold. Everyone was talking about her disappearance, and the mood in the town was tense. I decided to start my own investigation and headed over to Kate's house, hoping to find something the police might have missed. I knew her family well, so they did not object to my help. In her room, I found a diary where she wrote down her thoughts and plans. Flipping through the pages, I noticed several entries that seemed suspicious to me. Once, a week before she disappeared, Kate wrote that someone was following her. She felt strange eyes on her when she returned home in the evening. She even thought she saw a shadow outside her window at night, but decided it was just her imagination. I also found a note that sent chills down my spine. He knows where I live. It is not known who wrote it, but it was quite scary. Feeling that I was on the right track, I decided to visit the places where the girls usually congregated. Maybe I can find some clues. I went to the park where Megan used to run and to the place where Lisa was last seen. I carefully examined the surrounding area, trying to find something unusual. Suddenly, I noticed something shiny among the bushes. As I got closer, I discovered a bracelet that belonged to Megan. My heart beat faster. It was clear proof that she was here. But why didn't the police find him earlier? I took the bracelet and decided to show it to Sheriff Johnson. He was a good man and knew me well since childhood. He listened carefully to my guesses and promised to consider all new evidence. The following days were spent in anxiety and anticipation. I felt that we were on the verge of a solution, but I did not yet know how deep and dark it would go. The city lived in fear, and I could not shake the thought that someone was carefully watching me from the shadows. When I brought the bracelet to Sheriff Johnson, he immediately took it for analysis. Police checked him for fingerprints and DNA. A few days later, they got the results, but it didn't give any concrete clues. The prints were fuzzy, and the DNA didn't match any of the databases. Sheriff Johnson was upset, but did not give up. He ordered a thorough inspection of the park and surrounding areas. A team of police combed every nook and cranny for any clues. One evening, when I was about to go to bed, the sheriff called me. He reported that they had found something important. My curiosity and anxiety rose again, and I hurried to the police station. There, I met with the sheriff and several of his subordinates. They showed me photos of the findings. It turned out that not far from where I found the bracelet, they found a small treasure trove of things belonging to the missing girls. Cell phones, jewelry, personal items. It was very strange and creepy. Who could collect these things and why? Sheriff Johnson discovered something else. All things were hidden in an old abandoned hut that stood on the outskirts of the park. They decided not to divulge this information so as not to panic the town even more, but it gave them new hope to find the criminal. I decided that I had to see this hut with my own eyes. At night, when the city was asleep, I took a flashlight and headed to the park. The road to the hut was dark and scary, but I felt I had to be brave. When I finally reached the hut, I saw that the door was open. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to enter. Inside, everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. Things found by the police were lying on the floor like witnesses of terrible events. And then I heard footsteps behind me. A chill ran down my spine and I turned around but saw no one. My heart was ready to jump out of my chest. I decided that it was dangerous to stay here and hurried to the exit. On the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. Perhaps the maniac already knows that I am trying to reveal his secret. My confidence grew, but so did my fear. When the police thoroughly searched the hut, they found several other important items. On the floor next to the old bed, they discovered a disguised trap, a hole cut into the floor that led to the basement. When they got down there, they found something that shocked everyone. The basement was cold and damp, lit only by the dim light of a lamp hanging from the ceiling. Pieces of old clothes and personal belongings of the missing girls were lying on the floor. But the most eerie thing was that they found a primitive makeshift prison. A cage made of metal bars stood in the corner of the basement. Inside was a bed with dirty blankets and several empty water bottles. Sheriff Johnson, seeing this, realized that they were dealing with a very dangerous maniac. They also found several handwritten notes and drawings on the walls. Some of them were drawings of girls, others were strange symbols and ciphers. It looked like part of a perverted ritual or game played by a maniac. On one of the tables, the police found an old laptop. It was password protected, but police technicians quickly took control of it to crack the security and find more information. In addition, on the table was a notebook with entries that looked like a criminal's diary. He described his actions, his plans, and even his thoughts about each of the victims. Here is an excerpt from that diary. Kate was very interesting. She fought for a long time but finally gave up. Her fear was so sweet. Now I have to find a new victim. Who will be next? These records were so creepy that even experienced officers felt uncomfortable reading them. Sheriff Johnson decided to increase security measures in the city and organize night patrols to protect residents from the maniac. When I learned about the findings of the police, I was filled with fear, but at the same time with determination. I realized that now we have more evidence and can get closer to solving the mystery. But I also knew that the maniac now knew for sure that we were on his trail. My struggle was just beginning. With each passing day, the tension in the town of Riverdale grew. Police continued their investigation, but answers still eluded them. The city lived in fear, and every look from a stranger aroused suspicion. I decided to proceed regardless of the risks. I remembered what Sheriff Johnson had mentioned about the laptop found in the cabin. I knew that if anyone could crack his defenses quickly, it would be my computer-savvy friend Mark. Mark was a technical genius, albeit a bit of an eccentric. I went to him, hoping for his help. When I told him about the find, he immediately agreed to help. We arranged to meet in his garage where he kept his equipment. It was evening, and I felt a slight chill as I walked to his house. The light was on in the garage, and I knocked on the door. "Hey, Emily, come in," Mark greeted with a smile. I showed him a photo of the laptop, and he immediately started working. We were both silent until Mark punched in the password. It seemed like an eternity before he finally managed to break through the defenses. "Here, we're in the system," he said proudly. I leaned closer to see what we found. The laptop contained hundreds of files, including photos, videos, and documents. We started going through them one by one, looking for clues. Among the files, we found a video that was recorded from a hidden camera. It showed the girls in the cabin, including Kate and Lisa. It was terrifying to watch, but we knew it was important evidence. We also found text documents where the maniac recorded his plans and observations of the victims. In one of the documents, he wrote about a new goal, and I felt my heart sink when I read the name. Emily. "Mark, he's been following me," I said, feeling the panic begin to rise. Mark looked at me with concern. "We need to report this to the police immediately," he said. We quickly collected all the files on a flash drive and went to the police station. Sheriff Johnson was surprised by our findings and immediately began to organize an operation to protect me and capture the maniac. I couldn't sleep at night. I felt that someone was looking at me from the darkness. My fear was real, and I knew the maniac was somewhere nearby. He knew we were on his trail, and that made him even more dangerous. The night was long and sleepless. I tried to sleep, but every sound, every movement of the shadow outside the window made my heart beat faster. I knew that the maniac was somewhere nearby, watching me. At dawn, I decided to gather my thoughts and move on. The morning started with a call from Sheriff Johnson. He said the police had increased patrols around my house and installed hidden surveillance cameras. This gave me a little confidence, but I still felt that danger was near. I decided to return to Mark to discuss our next steps. He was the only one I could trust in this situation. When I arrived at his garage, he was already waiting for me with a bunch of printed files that we found on his laptop. "Emily, I went through some of these files," he said as I entered. "It seems that the maniac has very detailed plans. He doesn't just choose his victims at random. He watches them for a long time, knows their habits, routes, and weaknesses." Mark showed me a map of our town which marked the places where the maniac had seen his victims. These were parks, cafes, a library, and even a school. He made very careful plans, and that made him even more dangerous. "He also wrote down his thoughts and plans for the future," continued Mark. "Here, for example, are his records about you. He has been following you for several months. It knows when you go for a run, where you like to drink coffee, and even who your friends are." I felt a chill run down my spine. The realization that someone had been watching me for so long was unbearable. "We have to use this to catch him," I said, trying to gather my thoughts. "If we know his methods, we can predict his next move." Mark agreed with me, and we began to analyze the data, trying to figure out where he might appear next. He seemed to follow a certain schedule and liked to return to places he had already checked. "We can try to trap him," Mark suggested. "If he's following you, we can use that against him. You should pretend that you don't suspect anything and behave as usual. The police will be there to protect you." I understood that it was very risky, but we had no other options. We discussed our plan with Sheriff Johnson, and he agreed to provide support. That evening, I went for a run as usual. The police were quietly watching me, and I tried to keep calm, even though I felt fear in every cell of my body. I was running along a familiar route when I suddenly noticed a shadow moving in my direction. It was him. My heart beat faster as I noticed a shadow moving in my direction. I tried to stay calm and kept running, but every step I took echoed in the silence around me. The police officers following me were ready to intervene, but I knew I couldn't just stop and wait. I had to play my role to the end. The shadow was approaching. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. The feeling of someone breathing down my back became unbearable, and suddenly I heard someone call my name. "Emily, wait!" I turned and saw a stranger quickly approaching me. His face was hidden under the hood, but I recognized the voice. It was the same voice heard in the recordings found in the hut. He was here, right in front of me. "You shouldn't have interfered," he said, his voice filled with hatred. "Now you are my next target." I felt adrenaline rush through my body. I knew I couldn't run away because the police were nearby. Instead, I decided to bide my time and give them a chance to act. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "What makes you mock people?" He paused for a moment as if pondering my question. His eyes, hidden in the shadow of the hood, shone with malice. "They deserve it," he replied. "All these girls, they thought they were special. They thought they could control the world, but I showed them who the real master was. I realized that in front of me was a person full of hatred and a desire for control. His words were sick and twisted, but they made me understand that he thought of himself as an avenger." "And you think you can control me?" I asked, trying to buy some more time. "You think you can make me fear you?" He took a step forward, and I felt a cold fear wash over me. But just at that moment, the police jumped out of the darkness and grabbed him. He was caught off guard, and his hands were quickly handcuffed. "It's all over," said Sheriff Johnson, emerging from the bushes. "Now you can hurt anyone anymore." The maniac was taken away in a police car, and I was relieved that it was finally over. But at the same time, I knew that now a new stage would begin: the investigation and search for other possible victims. The next part of the story will continue the story of the investigation and new revelations. The following days after the arrest of the maniac were full of events. The police began investigations and interrogations, trying to understand the scale of the crimes and find all the victims. The town of Riverdale was slowly returning to normal, but the wounds remained deep. I became a key witness in the case, so I often visited the police station. I needed to tell about everything I knew and experienced. It was exhausting, but I understood that I had to help catch the criminal once and for all. One day, Sheriff Johnson invited me into his office. "Emily, we found something else," he said as I sat down. During the search of the suspect's house, we found another laptop, and it seems he has more information than we might have expected. I looked at him in surprise. "What did you find?" The sheriff leaned forward and opened his laptop. There are videos and photos that he kept here, but the most interesting thing is the journal where he wrote down his thoughts and plans. He described every step he took, every sacrifice he made, and worst of all, there are records of new plans. They concern you. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did he write?" The sheriff flipped a few pages and showed me the records. "Emily is getting too interesting. She can ruin everything. I have to do something to stop her. She has to be my next target." "He was planning to attack you," the sheriff said, his voice serious. "But thanks to your courage, we were able to prevent this. You saved not only yourself, but also others. We continued to analyze the records. It turned out that the maniac did not act alone. He had accomplices who helped him in the abduction and surveillance of the victims. It was a shock to us all, because it meant that the threat still existed." "We have to find them," Sheriff Johnson said. "They can be dangerous." The investigation continued, and I felt that my life would never be the same. But I knew I had to keep fighting to protect myself and others. One evening, I was sitting at home when I got a message on my phone. It was from an unknown number. The message contained only one word: soon. I felt my heart stop. The threat was still there, and I knew I couldn't stop. The maniac was arrested, but his accomplices are still at large, and they knew I could be their next target. The next part of the story promises even more dangers and revelations. After receiving the threatening message, I immediately contacted Sheriff Johnson. The police began intensively looking for accomplices of the maniac, but it was not easy. Those who helped him were careful and covered their tracks well. The sheriff organized a task force to investigate. They began by analyzing all the recordings and videos found on the maniac's laptops. Every detail, every hint could be important. In addition, the police interrogated everyone who might have any information about the activities of the maniac and his accomplices. One day, a few weeks after the arrest of the maniac, the sheriff received an anonymous call. A man called who claimed to have information about one of the accomplices. He did not want to reveal his identity, but indicated a place where important evidence could be found. Sheriff Johnson immediately organized the operation. The place the anonymous pointed to was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The police carefully searched the premises and found a hidden basement. There they discovered even more records and personal belongings of the missing girls. But most importantly, they found photographs and documents that pointed to several people who could be involved in the crimes. Sheriff Johnson collected all of this evidence and began working to identify the suspects. Using facial recognition technology and social media analysis, they were able to identify several people who were in frequent contact with the maniac. One of them was a local taxi driver named Henry, the other a bartender from a local pub named Michael. The police started surveillance of the suspects, trying to collect more evidence of their involvement. Henry often visited old abandoned buildings and wooded places where victims could be buried. Michael, in turn, was always aware of all the events in the city and seemed too interested in everything that was happening. One evening, when I returned home, I was greeted by Sheriff Johnson. "Emily, we have good news," he said with a smile. "We found and detained 2 suspects. They admitted that they helped a maniac and were involved in kidnappings. Thanks to you and your help, we were able to stop them." I felt a huge relief, but also understood that this was not the end. The police continued the investigation, trying to find all possible accomplices and reveal all the details of the crimes. The town of Riverdale was returning to normal, but the fear and pain remained. We all knew we had to be careful and support each other. The next part will tell about how the town copes with the consequences of the terrible events and how Emily tries to return to normal life. It seemed that after the arrest of 2 accomplices of the maniac, life in Riverdale began to return to normal. The police patrolled the streets heavily, and the town once again took on a peaceful appearance. However, my life did not get any easier. The feeling of danger constantly haunted me. One morning, while I was having breakfast, a message popped up on my phone again, from an unknown number. My heart stopped when I opened it. There was only one word in the message. "Shall we continue?" I realized that this is not the end. The unidentified pursuer was still at large. I immediately notified Sheriff Johnson. He was concerned and promised to investigate immediately, but I knew it could take time. While the police were looking for new clues, people started disappearing in the town. First, it was a young girl named Kelly who didn't come home from a party. Then Jenny disappeared, went to work, and was never seen again. We were all horrified. Sheriff Johnson organized a search operation, but they were unsuccessful. The town was again in fear. I felt that I had to do something. I couldn't sit back knowing that people were in danger again. I again turned to Mark for help. We went through all the records and files trying to find anything that could help us understand who was behind the new disappearances. We noticed that some of the new records appeared already after the arrest of the maniac. It meant that someone was continuing his work. One day, while watching surveillance footage, we saw a suspicious figure near where Jenny was last seen. Mark managed to enlarge the image, and we saw that it was Michael, the same bartender that the police had arrested earlier. Is he free again? I was surprised. Mark explained that he was released due to lack of evidence. We immediately notified Sheriff Johnson of our findings. The police detained Michael again and began questioning him. Michael admitted that he was only following orders. He told about a mysterious person named Thomas who was in charge of all this. Thomas was the brains of the whole operation, and he always remained in the shadows. It was the first name we heard, and it gave us a new direction to investigate. Sheriff Johnson immediately began a search for Thomas. We knew he was around and that he could be extremely dangerous. My life was in danger again, but I felt that we were finally getting closer to the truth. The next part will tell how the police try to find and stop Thomas, and how Emily finds herself in the center of events again. After Michael's confession, the police began an intensive search for Thomas. Every step was important, and we all understood that we had little time. I continued to work with Sheriff Johnson, trying to find any leads on Thomas' whereabouts. One day, Mark received new information from his law enforcement contact. It turned out that Thomas used fake documents and worked in a nearby city as a security guard. This allowed us to narrow down our search. The police raided the house where, according to them, Thomas lived. However, when they entered, the house was empty. All traces indicated that Thomas had left the place literally a few hours before their arrival. Sheriff Johnson knew we were close and that Thomas was feeling the pressure. The next morning, I received another message. It was much more detailed and more ominous. Think you're saved? I'm always there. The next move is mine. This message caused me to panic, but at the same time made me determined to find and stop this criminal. I immediately shared this with Sheriff Johnson. He arranged for 24/7 security around my house, but I still didn't feel safe. Meanwhile, the police continued to monitor all possible contacts of Thomas. They monitored phone calls, checked surveillance cameras, and questioned anyone who might know his whereabouts. One evening, when I was coming home from work, I noticed something strange. There was an envelope on my doorstep. A sense of danger penetrated me. I carefully opened it and saw inside the photos of the missing girls. On the back of each photo was written, "Next up is Emily." I immediately called Sheriff Johnson, and he arrived within minutes. He carefully reviewed the photos and took the envelope for examination. The police began an even more active search. One day they came across a clue. Video from a surveillance camera in one of the hotels showed Thomas checking in under an assumed name. The police immediately went to the place and took him into custody. Thomas tried to run away but was caught after a short chase. He was defiant and showed no sign of fear or remorse. During interrogation, Thomas admitted that he was planning several more kidnappings, but he was stopped. He was the one who directed all the operations and planned every crime. Sheriff Johnson informed me that we can now breathe a sigh of relief. Thomas has been neutralized and his accomplices are either detained or in hiding. We all felt the worst was behind us, but the fear still lingered. The next part will tell how the town of Riverdale copes with the consequences of Thomas' detention and how Emily tries to get her life back on track after the horror she experienced. The trial of Thomas became a central event in the life of Riverdale. Everyone was waiting for the trial to learn more about his motives and crimes. The town wanted justice, and this process was an important step towards restoring peace. The trial began a few months after his arrest. The courtroom was filled with people who had come to see the trial of the man who terrorized their city. I was among the witnesses, and I was invited to be questioned as a key witness. On the first day of the trial, the prosecution lawyer presented all the evidence collected by the police. This included video footage, laptop recordings, and the testimony of other arrested accomplices. The prosecutor emphasized that Thomas was the mastermind of all the crimes and should be severely punished. Thomas' defense tried to prove that his client was mentally ill and could not control his actions. They invited psychiatrists who tried to confirm this diagnosis, but the evidence was insufficient. The court decided that Thomas was sane and knowingly committed his crimes. When it was time for my testimony, I felt fear and anxiety come over me. I told about all my encounters with the maniac and his accomplices, about the threats and how my life had become a nightmare because of their actions. I tried to be strong, but it was difficult to talk about all these horrors in front of a large audience. The prosecutor asked me a few questions, and then it was time for the defense. Thomas' lawyer tried to cast doubt on my testimony, but I managed to remain calm and answer clearly and confidently. I knew that my role in this process was important and that my words could help achieve justice. The trial lasted several weeks. Every day, new witnesses came forward and told their stories. It was a difficult time for all of us, but we understood that it was necessary. On the last day of the trial, after much debate and deliberation, the jury reached its verdict. Thomas was found guilty of all charges against him, including kidnapping, torture, and murder. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. This moment was a huge relief for all of us. We knew that the most dangerous criminal could do no more harm. People in the courtroom applauded, and I felt a heavy stone fall from my heart. After the trial, Sheriff Johnson approached me. "Emily, you did a great job. Thanks to you, we were able to stop this horror. The town is grateful to you." I smiled, but knew I still had a long road to recovery ahead of me. But now we had a chance at a normal life, and that gave us hope. The next part will tell about how the city recovers after the trial and how Emily tries to rebuild her life after the horror she experienced. After the trial and conviction of Thomas, the town of Riverdale gradually began to recover from the horror experienced. Life was returning to a normal rhythm, but many traumas and fears remained that needed time to heal. It was a particularly difficult period for me. Nightmares and constant fear for my life remained with me. I started seeing a therapist to deal with the effects of stress and trauma. It was difficult, but I knew I had to fight for my life and regain my peace. The city organized a series of meetings and events to support the victims and their families. Sheriff Johnson spoke at each of them, emphasizing the importance of unity and mutual support. He also thanked me for helping with the investigation, which was very nice and important to me. During one of these events, I met with the families of other victims. It was emotionally difficult, but also therapeutic. We shared our stories, supported each other, and found solace in shared experiences. It helped me feel like I wasn't alone in this. One day I received a letter from the family of one of the girls who was saved thanks to my testimony. They thanked me for my courage and support, and it was incredibly touching. This letter gave me new strength to continue fighting for my life and for the lives of others. The police continued to investigate, trying to find all possible accomplices of Thomas. Sheriff Johnson assured me that they would do everything they could to make sure no one else could be harmed. It gave hope, but also a reminder that the struggle is not over. I decided to return to my job at the local newspaper. It helped me distract myself and rebuild my life. My colleagues supported me, and I felt that I had strong support from them. We've been working on articles about events in Riverdale, emphasizing the importance of community safety and support. One evening, when I was coming home from work, I was greeted by a neighbor with a big smile on her face. "Emily, you're a real hero," she said. "Thanks to you, we can feel safe again." These words warmed my heart and gave me new hope. I knew that there was still a lot of work ahead, but I felt that together we could overcome any difficulties. The next installment will follow Emily's next steps in her recovery and the new challenges she will face on her way to a normal life. Several months have passed since Thomas' trial ended. Riverdale gradually recovered, and life in the town became more and more peaceful. I also felt that I could finally start a new phase in my life. One morning, I woke up with a feeling that something would change today. I got ready for work, and as I was leaving the house, I noticed that there was an announcement on the house next door about a charity concert organized in support of the victims and victims of Thomas crimes. It was a great sign that our town was really starting to heal. In the editorial office, I was met by colleagues with a new task. We had to prepare an article about the process of community recovery after those terrible events. I decided that this would be a great opportunity to show everyone how much we have achieved and how strong we have become through our unity. While writing this article, I met many people who shared their stories of healing and recovery. These were incredibly strong and inspiring stories. The town has come together like never before, and everyone is working hard to make Riverdale a safe and welcoming place to live. One of my meetings was with Kelly, who was able to escape from Thomas and was now involved in helping other victims. She became a symbol of courage and resilience for many people. We talked for a long time about how important it is not to give up and to continue fighting for your life and freedom. In the evening, returning home after a busy day, I felt that I had done something important. The town has changed, and so have I. I was no longer the scared girl who dreaded every sound in the night. Now I felt strong and capable of any challenges. One night at a benefit concert, Sheriff Johnson took the stage and began his performance. We all went through many trials, but we persevered. Today we celebrate our unity and strength. I want to thank each of you for your support and courage. And I especially want to mention Emily, who has become a real hero for our town. These words brought tears to my eyes. I felt that everything I went through was not in vain. The city applauded, and I felt that I could finally let go of all the fears and horrors of the past. After the concert, people came up to me, thanked me, and shared their stories. I realized that our lives have changed forever, but we have become stronger and closer to each other. In closing my article on rebuilding the community, I wrote the last lines. Riverdale is no longer the same town it once was. We've been through horrors, but we've become stronger. Our town is a place where courage and unity triumphed over fear and crime. Together we made a new story, a story of strength and hope. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. I knew there were still many challenges ahead, but now I was ready to face them with my head held high.